Good evening. As we saw in the first episode of the series, metabolism is the sum of the total changes and motion that the body undertakes and sustains in order to convert all the nutrients we eat and drink into energy. We also saw how each one of us is under the spell or the influence of two nervous systems according that is to medical physiology. The sympathetic, which I called excitable for ease of memorization, and the parasympathetic system, referred to as passive. All things being equal, the excitable system prepares us for fighting, therefore in principle shutting down all the processes that interfere with the ability to be alert and fight. The passive system instead fosters and facilitates those processes that have to do with maintenance, sleep, lack of stress, digestion, and so forth. Furthermore, and to recall, a slice of bread, for example, is too big for a cell or for cells to be processed. The slice of bread and every other food undertakes a series of transformations which we could only define as fantastic in order to be converted into available energy. The chemical form that the bread and most other forms of food take up once transformed is called glucose, known as blood sugar. The term comes from the Greek and it means sweet. Through stimuli that come from the nervous system, as we saw in the first episode, signals reach the organ called the pancreas. The pancreas produces hormones, the most important of which is the famous insulin. Glucose was first isolated from raisins in 1747 by the German chemist Andreas Marggraf, more or less at the time when England and the American colonies were battling the French for the domain of Canada. Glucose is stored in the liver and in muscles as glycogen. One way of classifying individual metabolism is the rate or speed at which the energy contained in food is converted into glucose and glycogen. And when the speed of metabolism is low or very slow, the glycogen, instead of being used to produce energy, is stored in the body as plain fat, plain and simple. Another way of defining a person who carries more fat than necessary is a person with a lot of stored energy to be used in the future. The most classic example of this process is found in the metabolic habit of the bear, who sleeps for 3 months while he is kept alive by the energy stored as fat. With humans, the metabolism can be so slow that its action may be compared to that of a refrigerator. Much of what is eaten is stored before having a chance of being actually used in the production or expenditure of energy. Now, what are the causes of slow metabolism? One of the primary causes of slow metabolism is dehydration, that is, plainly lack of water. And one of the first keys and methods to speed up metabolism is to drink sufficient water. How much we will see later. Another factor influencing metabolism is the function or the dysfunction of the thyroid gland. Some people are aware of a problem and some are not, but we will discuss how to address and resolve and hopefully resolve thyroid issues in one of the next episodes. One way of deducting the presence of a thyroid issue is the body temperature, or rather, one indicative symptom of thyroid issues is the general sense of cold that some people experience, cold hands, for example, cold feet, or generic general lack of energy. Those of you who have frequent occasions of dealing with babies will have noticed that the newborn baby is warm. Why? Because the main cause of this is that the baby has an accelerated metabolism. In turn, accelerated metabolism produces a loss of energy, and energy produces heat. Now, What influences low metabolism? A main cause is, of course, an incorrect diet, because if the diet is heavily oriented towards carbohydrates such as bread, flour, sugar, sweets, ice cream, pastries, and sweetened beverages, chocolate, or similar, automatically the metabolism slows down. 4. There are certain foods that increase, and a certain food that decrease the metabolism. It follows that a person with a slow metabolism should eat more of the types of food that increase metabolism and less of the others, as we will see later. Another effect of slow metabolism is the proliferation of fungi, some of which affect more women than men. One of these fungi, for example, produces 78 types of toxic substances that are acid, and this in turn, the acidity that is, interferes with the oxygen in the body and slows down metabolism. Problems caused by this fungus are or can be skin irritation, migraine, sinusitis, constipation, and so forth. There are also specific foods that influence metabolism because they affect the thyroid gland, such, for example, peanuts and soya. The key is to know, remember, and realize the importance of different key foods. Now, the goal of good metabolism, and hopefully of this series, is to improve metabolism and to end the constrictions and the strictures of diet. 4. In the vision, theory, and practice that connects life and health with metabolism, the majority of health problems are related in one way or another to metabolism. As I mention and repeat, I have become interested in metabolism out of interest in the work of Francois, a gentleman from Puerto Rico who has built a successful network of clinics in several countries, all dedicated to improve health and reduce or resolve health problems through and with metabolism. 4. As you know, or have heard, observed, or maybe concluded, notwithstanding an almost endless list of miracle and costly diets, statistically both obesity and diabetes have increased rather than decreased. I mentioned two specific conditions, that is, obesity and diabetes, but the overwhelming majority of health conditions can be related to and improved by a better knowledge of metabolism and by how to improve it. 4. To use a familiar analogy, food is like the fuel of the body. Metabolism is like the engine that converts fuel into energy and therefore into motion. Therefore, if the metabolism is low or very slow, no change in diet will affect it, for it would equate to attempting, for example, to repair an engine that needs repair by changing the brand of fuel. But now you may ask, how much water should we drink in order to increase metabolism and to reduce the level of overweight and or obesity? Now, given the multiplicity of drinks available, soft drinks, coffee, teas, chocolates, smoothies, etc., a cultural situation has developed, if you like, in which water has taken a secondary position. Now, there is a study by a scientist, Mr. Batmangelidi, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, who is the author of a book titled Your Body's Many Cries for Water, which describes how the body craves for water, which is an area of research that he has dedicated 20 years to, during which he made a fascinating discovery as regards a person who does not drink or drinks very little water. There is a sensor in the part of the brain that controls the sensation of thirst, and this makes sense. And when a subject does not drink water, this sensor gradually is switched off. And when the sensor in turn is switched off, the person, of course, does not feel thirst. It follows then that the person that least experiences the sensation of thirst, the more he and she or she becomes dehydrated. and it equally follows that the person who keeps himself or herself hydrated continues to feel the sensation of thirst for water. By tracing the experience of persons affected by obesity, diabetes, or general overweight conditions, it has been discovered that these persons statistically, at least, dislike water, which is one cause that directly affects being overweight. And although it may seem paradoxical, water is an acquired taste. There are cases of persons so dehydrated that the water sensor being switched off, they reach the point of feeling sick. The solution, then, is to begin to acquire the habit of drinking water. The good news is that just after 3 days, at least statistically, and I'm referring here to research results, not the drawn from here or there, after making a voluntary decision to drink water, after the 3rd day, the sensor begins to work again, the third sensor, and at that point the body itself will ask for water. During these first days of, let's call it hydro re-education, if we can use the term, the dehydrated person should drink water as if it were actually a medicine. And after 3 days, as I said, the person becomes water-friendly, does not crave for juice or other substitutive drinks because the sensor has been reactivated. For water is critical for all the physiological processes, that is to say, for all the chemical processes involved with the body. The body cannot process ingested food adequately if it does not have enough water. But there is more. If you know of a person that complains about acidity of stomach, that complaint is related to a state of dehydration. 4. In the stomach, there is an acid called hydrochloric acid. It is an acid so strong that it is capable of reducing to dust an iron nail. Hydrochloric acid can dissolve the most resistant substances, which prompts a natural question. How is it possible that we have inside ourselves an acid that strong, and yet how it is that the stomach resists it and does not melt itself? The way the body accomplishes this is that, if we drink water in sufficient quantity, the water combines with the salt in the body to create sodium bicarbonate. And sodium bicarbonate is what covers the walls of the stomach. Therefore, the stomach could be described as nothing else but an alkaline bottle with a large quantity of sodium bicarbonate. And as the sodium bicarbonate is alkaline by definition, and the hydrochloric acid is equally acid by definition, the sodium bicarbonate keeps the acidity under control. All people who suffer from stomach acidity and begin to drink water in adequate amounts regularly will promptly experience relief and elimination from acidity. This Dr. Batmangelidi, whom I referred to earlier, recounts in his book a biographical episode, meaning that soon after the fall of the Shah of Iran in the distant, now 1979, he found himself in prison and had no means to properly treat the patients who called on him in prison, knowing that he was a doctor. Therefore, he treated them with water. There were patients suffering from ulcer, acidity, and reflux. All these symptoms water could cure, including even asthma. However, this is not something habitually known because there is no money or profit in water, fortunately. The system is geared to sell medicines, but in reality, water is a very medicinal substance, though habitually we would not think so of plain water. People who are much dehydrated and do not drink sufficient water often feel tired, especially in the evening, because the body is too acid. Adequate water, adequate hydration is of key importance for all the functions of the body, which makes sense. We should keep in mind, of course, that the blood itself is up to 60% water. And the more dehydrated is a person, the thicker the blood, the thicker the blood, the less easy is its flow. It also makes sense. Other advantages have to do with the improvement of the conditions of the skin, and, as another improving symptom, if that condition exists, hair ceases to fall out. Because one of the overlooked analogies between physiology and nature is that hair is very much like a plant, and plants as a whole need water. This consideration, to be sure, excludes hormonal or other connected issues connected with hair loss. Furthermore, adequate hydration leads to better sleep. It facilitates shedding excess weight, eliminates acidity, and increases overall energy. Given that the water is the engine of metabolism, the next question is how much water is necessary to achieve sufficient hydration, given the great variety of body types, weight, etc. We all know or remember that water is chemically represented by H2O. In turn, this means that when we drink water, we are incorporating and eventually processing oxygen. And oxygen is what produces or makes possible combustion. If the goal is to consume fat accumulated in the body, in the abdomen, on the arms, on the sides, wherever, it follows that oxygen in the body should be increased to increase combustion. The formula actually follows the guidelines established by a doctor who wrote this book, Your Body's Many Cries for Water. If the calculation is in pounds, and let's assume a body weight of 160 pounds, the body weight ought to be divided by 16, which in this example is of course 10. That is, a person weighing 160 pounds should drink in the period of 24 hours 10 cups of water. A cup being 8 ounces, it follows that a person weighing 160 pounds should drink 80 ounces of water, equivalent to 0.625 US gallons, or a bit more than half a gallon. As obvious as this is, this volume of water is to be drunk not at once, but distributed throughout the 24 hours. And it has been clinically proven that with this amount of water, the metabolism cannot help but increase, because what increases is the level of oxygen directly delivered to the biochemical system that converts food into energy, as I mentioned before. And as you begin to do this, you will begin noticing two things. The first thing is that you will start losing fat. And the first evidence will be that what you wear appears larger than before. It makes sense. And this even if you continue eating the same, I'm speaking hypothetically, of course, the same junk food you may have been eating before, that is, even if you do not change the diet. Because just the action of incorporating more oxygen in the water triggers a natural combustion. It begins to extract toxic substances, eliminates the acid, increases the alkalinity, and automatically the body begins to consume fat. The other important point is that when you begin to consume a level of water suitable to your body weight, the sensation of hunger disappears. For it has been discovered that in the back part of the brain there are actually two sensors. One sensor is referred to as the thirst sensor that I mentioned before, and very close to the thirst sensor and at a minimal distance there is the hunger sensor. Now, a combination of habits and physiological responses make it so that for some people the sense of thirst is converted into a sense of hunger, and they end up eating more than necessary because the body does not have sufficient water. But when the body is sufficiently hydrated, the sense of hunger is dramatically reduced because the sensors I refer to, these sensors now work properly. That is, we no longer eat to quench what was actually not hunger but thirst. The point is that by hydrating the body properly, it is possible to shed excess weight, have more energy, improve the condition of the skin, and it helps those who are affected by constipation, improves sleep, and eliminates, as I said, acidity in the stomach. For drinking water partakes of the miraculous, as St. Francis said in one of his poems. But there is something else, and actually something extraordinary that has been recently discovered about water. A doctor by the name of Gerald Pollack, who is actually also a biomechanical engineer and who has conducted a joint research with other scientists about some fascinating characteristics of water in connection with metabolism, he found something. Now, we all know or remember that water is chemically represented by the formula H2O, that is, the most abundant substance on the surface of the globe is water, as it covers much of its area, and by the way, the human body is composed for about 65% by water. Now, we remember from school that water exists in three phases: frozen, liquid, and gaseous, or steam. But Dr. Pollack has discovered a fourth phase, or state of water, which occurs after the water interacts with the cells of the body through metabolism. This research, confirmed also by other studies in Russia and Japan, has confirmed that when water enters the cells, it is chemically affected by the membrane of the cell, and it divides the water molecule into two different molecular parts. Part of the water forms a layer, clearly very thin, in which the water essentially is a gelatin, resembling much more egg white than liquid. And chemically, this substance is identified by the code H3O2. And this is its representation, which is different from the representation of the standard water molecule. This H3O2 water is completely alkaline, and electrically it has a negative charge. The remainder of the split molecule of water in the inside of the cell becomes chemically H3O, and this new water molecule is called hydronium, and this molecule is electrically positive. The inevitable conclusion is that what we have inside each cell is essentially a battery. The same Dr. Pollack, using a microelectrode, was able to measure the difference in voltage between the two parts of the cell, that is, the membrane filled with H3O2 and the rest of the cell filled with H3O, and this difference is 200 microvolts. This difference in voltage results in a current, and to this current is attributable the whole process of metabolism. So metabolism is also an electrical phenomenon. The physical discovery, this reinforces the notion that the more water we drink, meaning the volume of water proportional to the body weight, the more we affect the proper functioning of the million batteries that we have inside ourselves. In the analogy with the standard battery, as a battery dries up, it loses its charge. Not only, but what helps in the process of charging this battery is actually the light, namely the sun, which is interesting in more than one way. In the context of the current pandemic, none or few seem to remember, or wished for people to remember, that we all have inside ourselves what is called an immune system. And the key agent and promoter of the immune system is sunlight, referred to as vitamin D. And there is agreement among the experts that just a few minutes of exposure to sunlight every day is sufficient to acquire a sufficient dose of daily vitamin D. In summary, drinking the appropriate amount of water every day recharges the individual microbattery inside each cell, and sunlight acts as a catalyst. We may cover this in another episode. Which is, or rather, all this demonstrates at the root why it is important, or rather crucial, to keep the body hydrated according to the principles I described before. Principles that are not mine, but the experimental result of scientific studies by those whose business it is to study how to best use and maintain this mortal coil of ours, as Shakespeare would say. How to acquire the habit of proper hydration? Options there are, and there are many. One simple though elementary, it is to get hold of a mechanical counter and one 8-ounce glass. Each time you drink one glass, you just press the counter until you have reached the target. Some may smile, some may laugh, some may even scorn the idea, but perhaps one of the most challenging things in life is to acquire a habit. And in this respect, I conclude with a quote from one of the most interesting books I have read in the last few years. It's called The Journal of Henri Francois Amiel, who was a French-Swiss educator living in Geneva, Switzerland, who, on the subject of habits, says, "In the conduct of life, habits count more than maxims, because habit is a maxim that lives. It becomes flesh and instinct. To reform one's maxim is nothing. It is no more, for example, to change the title of a book. To learn new habits is everything, for it is to reach the substance of life. For life is but a tissue of habits." Thank you for watching. Until next time, I am GMB EP for Get Much Better. Good night.